Welcome to the Super Gamer Podcast. Welcome to the new Super Gamer Podcast, episode 162. Our guest this week is an indie adventure game dev, has made Lamplight City, Shardlight, A Golden Wake, the Ben Jordan series, is currently working on Rosewater, is the brains behind Grundislav Games. We have Francisco González. Thank you for being here.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So I will admit, the reason I reached out is I saw your tweet about how you're concerned that you've been working on Rosewater now for 4 years.
Yes.
And you're concerned that, people might be forgetting about it or unaware of it. Can you kind of tell me what brought that thought on?
Oh, man, it's a thought that I've been wrestling with for literally like 2 years now, because I'll admit I was very hubristic in my thought process when I started Rosewater, because Lamplight City, I got it done in 2.5 years, and I'm a solo dev. Like, I do pretty much everything except the music. And so, I've been making these games for a long time, so I have a pretty good idea. And when I say long time, I mean like 20 years. I started doing it as a hobby in like 2001. And I've made games of, I want to say, increasing scope with each project just to kind of push myself. And so, I liked to think that I had a pretty good idea of how I worked and generally how long things would take. So Lamplight City took me about 2.5 years to start to finish to do. And I started working on Rosewater in about January of 2019. So I thought, okay, well, it's probably going to be about the same size as Lamplight City. So I can do it in less time. Because, I just got off this project and I know what I did wrong and I know how to fix those mistakes and whatever. Not taking into account that I was doubling the resolution and also pushing myself as far as like doing like cinematic close-ups and stuff, and the scope of it was actually bigger. So I was like, oh, well, okay, no, this is actually going to be more like a 4-year project. And then, of course, not even counting the whole pandemic thing, which didn't really have too much of an effect on the production. But yeah, so basically the concern came from the fact that, as an indie dev, you always want to make people aware of what you're working on, and you always want to be in people's thoughts so they don't move on to the next thing, because there's so many indie games coming out. So getting noticed and keeping people's attention is a very real thing that we all have to deal with. So, I announced it in 2019 and I put out a teaser trailer in like 2020 saying, oh, coming 2021. And that was obviously 2 years ago. So, I've been consistently tweeting about it and talking about it to anyone who'll listen and stuff. But honestly, it's like, yeah, it's just like, man, I really hope that people still remember this game. Because, like, you put it on your wish list and you forget about it. And maybe Steam will send an email when it comes out. But, just building that hype is hard. So that's where that came from. So again, thank you for talking to me, because I've also felt like now is the time to start like getting the hype ball rolling, or the hype train going, and talking to people again about it. So,
well, you must be doing a circuit. I see you were on Scene World podcast. I think it might have been released today, even that we are talking.
It was released today. We recorded back in I want to say late March or early April.
Oh,
so It was kind of very fortunate. I had no idea it was coming out today, so I was like, oh, look at that, we have our interview today, and this other one just came out today. Okay, cool.
You mentioned the pandemic there and how that doesn't necessarily affect production, but you have said that it definitely affects what you're talking about, the hype. You can't really get out to conventions while that's on and tell people about the game. Pandemic aside, do you regret announcing the game as early as you did? Would you have preferred it to be closer to release?
Honestly, no, because that's the thing too. Like, unless you're very lucky and you get a lot of attention at that moment, you're not going to get as much. I don't think I would have gotten as much momentum as if I had announced it when I did, because, at least people might, there's definitely going to be people who are like, I've definitely had people who have said to me like, oh, you're taking too long. I'm taking this off my wish list. I don't care anymore. So I think it's like 1 or 2 people who have said that have scarred me, but the vast majority of people don't do that. And Yeah, I mean, it's really a gamble to do that. Like, do you know Inkle? They did 80 Days, and more recently they're working on a Highland song, I believe it's called.
I don't.
Okay, well they do a lot of I mean, their biggest hit so far I think has been 80 Days, and Heaven's Vault too was another one that they did.
I'm familiar with that one, yeah.
Yeah. So they kind of did a surprise release of a game called Overboard, which is like a murder mystery where you're the murderer, and basically the gameplay is that you have to cover your tracks. And so it's like this really fun, quirky sort of like, you know, with 1930s, I think, on a boat. But they just released it like without any announcement at all. But because they have such a big following and they have that built-in audience and stuff, they themselves said that it was a risk, but it was a gamble that paid off because it did really well. But they just, you know, they can do that because they're Inkle. Like, yeah, I've made games, but I don't feel like I can do that because I'm just like, I don't know. I just don't think I can do that. So yeah, for me personally, I feel like just hitting people over the head constantly, being like, buy my game is what or pay attention to my game is what I have to do. So yeah.
Well, so Rosewater, I should tell people, it takes place in an alternate reality, kind of United States, not really United States, because in this reality they never went independent from Britain, so it's a Commonwealth of Britain in the 19th century. You play a former fighter turned reporter who tracks down a story, and it kind of leads to this crazy lost fortune treasure hunt. Am I right there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I'm assuming, like, because it takes place in the same world but different characters, is Rosewater a sequel to Lamplight City?
It's more of a spin-off. But I like to say, it's kind of pretentious, but I like to say it's like the Vice City to GTA 3, right? Like, it's the same universe, but it's not a sequel per se.
Right.
It's just exploring more of the world.
Any sort of Easter eggs? Like, oh, I remember that from Lamplight.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, there's lots of references and stuff. Like, they name drop Lamplight City a few times, like the actual city, and, you know, they talk about, like, events, and the sort of background events of the world are very important to the plot of Rosewater. And, I mean, the main character in Rosewater is the sister of the dead partner from Lamplight City, so there's a connection there. But you don't have to have played Lamplight City to appreciate Rosewater. You'll get more of the references and stuff if you did play Lamplight City, but Rosewater is very much its own standalone thing.
So I'm sure you're very tired of hearing this question, but do we have a ballpark release date for Rosewater?
I have an internal release date, but I don't want to say it because I've already been bitten once by making a premature announcement, but for now I'll say late 2023.
Okay. The voice cast you've got obviously is stacked. A lot of people have said that.
Thank you.
You've said
for
that.
Saying that. Well, I've said it because I want more people to know this.
I mean, you have Roger Clark, who played Arthur Morgan.
Yeah.
You have Sissy Jones, Vivian Liu, Cam Clark, like tons of really cool people. And I know you're actually doing a talk on this in a month or so. And I know ultimately, I'm sure the answer is, well, I paid them. But how did you get this cast together?
Yeah, somebody else said that, and I was like, yeah, that's the lightning version of my talk. Yeah, I got this cast together through both luck and tenacity, I guess. So to make a very long story short, and to give you an even briefer version of what I'm going to talk about, there is SAG-AFTRA. So all of my games that I've done commercially, I've had voice acting in, and that's like one of my favorite parts of it, because it's like, as the writer, your reward of after working on these games for so long is to hear them brought to life by voice actors. But previously I had worked non-union because that's, you know, kind of what you can afford as an indie dev, right? So I had been made aware recently of a new rate, I guess we could call it, or a contract tier or whatever in SAG-AFTRA, which was the low budget video game agreement, which basically was an established rate if your game's budget did not exceed $1.5 million. So I was like, oh, that's easy. Yeah, of course. I'm never going to go over 1.5 million. But the per session cost was still a lot. It was double what I was paying for non-union gigs plus studio time. So I was like, oh, well, this is, you know, it's affordable, but probably more to like what I would say AAA studios, you know, like they're still indie, but they have, you know, a team of say 10 or 15 people or like an actual budget or something like that. So I knew of its existence, but I still thought it was out of reach. And then because of COVID, the entire landscape of voice acting changed, and pretty much everybody had to have a home studio because the studios were all closed. So I spoke with a friend of mine who I had met at GDC, who's also a voice actor, and he had kind of told me to get in touch with the union and see if I could negotiate, because I was like, it's still out of my range, you know, whatever. But he was like, well, we'll see if they can negotiate on a case by case basis. Again, long story short, I got in touch with the union. It turned out that with the not having to worry about the cost of studio rental, I actually could afford it. So yeah, I took advantage of the low budget video game agreement, and I was like, all right, this is going to be a union project. But now the big question is, who can I get? Because, you know, it's still essentially scale. So I was in the mindset of like, well, obviously I'm not going to be able to get like huge names or anything like that. Like, I mean, I wasn't going for huge names in like the A-list celebrity sense. I had a lot of people be like, oh, are you going to get like Tom Cruise or Keanu Reeves? I'm like, no, that's not how this works. But I did go to a bunch of agencies' websites and just kind of go through their talent rosters and you know, names that I recognize, because I'm a pretty big voiceover nerd. Like, I know a bunch of, you know, I'm always like, I know who these people are. Like, I know a lot of people hear the voices and they're like, oh yeah, I know this voice or whatever. But I'm like, oh yeah, this is so and so, and they did this and this and that. So anyway, I went through and I saw who was at which agency, and I was like, oh man, it would be so cool if I could get this person for this role, or like, you know. So I kind of was going through and looking at people that I knew had done narrative games or specifically adventure games, or just, you know, who were familiar with the whole like language of narrative games. And people that I knew would have home studios, and just people whose work I knew or at least was somewhat familiar with. So I made this fantasy cast list, expecting that I might get like one or two or maybe three people say yes, and they all said yes. And I was like, I can't believe this. Like, one of the best days was just like the day that my casting, because the friend of mine who I talked to, I hired him as the casting director in addition to being in the game, Chris Shula. And he just was like, he's like, all right, I send out all the offers. We're just waiting to hear back. And I was like, okay. And then it was like, Dave Fenoy said yes. I'm like, oh my God, that's so cool. Oh, Neil Ross said yes. Oh my God, wow. Oh, Cam Clark said yes. And it was just like this snowball of like excitement, like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm actually gonna get these people in the game. And yeah, so that's basically what happened. You know, I sent them, we just basically didn't ask them to read, just kind of said, hey, look, there's this game. I've done other games before. You know, that was the reason too I hired a casting director who had experience with SAG, because, you know, he spoke agent, so to speak. I had never dealt with having to cast through agencies before. So yeah, that's basically how we did it, and I was just like over the moon. I still, to this day, I'm still like, I still have a bunch of audio to edit, but I'm like, I can't believe these people actually said yes and read my little words, and like, they were all super cool to work with, and it was like, yeah, so that's been great.
I really love you have behind the scenes videos on your YouTube channel showing, and like, it's so cool to see who's a hand talker and who is, you know, like, their different process is really neat. Was it intimidating at all? And did, at any point were you kind of like, oh boy, now I need to really make a good game?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was interesting too, to like, everybody was amazing. Everybody was super professional, but it was also really interesting to see the differences between the people who are like professional as far as like, okay, this is the work, this is just a job. Like everybody was really nice, but some people were like, let's be friends, versus like, okay, here I am, all business, let's do this. So that was really cool. But like, Yeah, no, I never really felt. My one moment of fanboyism was with Cam Clark. I was like, I showed him my Leonardo action figure because I had to, and he was like, "Oh, that's so nice," and like he was such a sweetheart. Cam Clark is amazing. But yeah, I don't know. I was really happy because I've always, I mentioned before that I like to push myself with each game, and this one specifically, like I felt like the art has gotten to, like, my art has gotten to a point where I look at it and I'm like, okay, this is okay, like this looks good. But I also wanted to push myself in the audio department, and I really think that just the quality of the voice, not to say that like non-union games are bad or the non-union actors are bad or anything like that, but there's a very noticeable just difference in the experience and the just what union actors bring to the table, and like having these people in my game has just been, yeah, I'm like, well, at least I'm fairly confident that the game is good, but I think that the voice acting is what's gonna make it great, really.
Yeah, I mean, while I was kind of researching, I was thinking how important voice acting is, particularly for adventure games, and I was like, well, I mean, we all remember, like, what do you know about voodoo, like,
oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, are you kidding? If I had been able to get Tim Curry, that would have been amazing, but I don't think he's doing much
no anymore. Unfortunately,
but unfortunately, but yeah, I mean, that was one of the things, like, it's funny because I didn't say this, but like when we were working with Dave Fennoy, I was like, he probably thinks I know him from The Walking Dead, but I'm like, no, it's from King's Quest 6. Good day, Prince Alexander. So, yeah.
You mentioned your animation there. What's the weirdest or most difficult thing you have had to do for rotoscoping, which is how you do your animation?
Yeah, the weirdest or the worst thing I've had to do is in Lamplight City, there was a character who gets punched and falls off a roof. And so I had to climb up on a chair and jump from a chair onto my bed to simulate the fall. That was probably the stupidest thing I ever did. And then I quickly realized that I had to stop doing my own stunts.
Did you hurt yourself?
No, but I could have.
Right.
It was one of those things where afterwards I was like, oh, wow, I really could have hurt myself. I shouldn't do these things anymore. There actually was another one where when I was, before I went commercial, I did a freeware series called Ben Jordan Paranormal Investigator, and one of the bad guys in the very last game, he also, like, he climbs over a railing and then jumps, and I had to do the climbing over the railing on, like, the front steps of my house, and I fell backwards and also realized, like, I could have landed wrong and, like, broken my neck, and no one would have seen, like, people driving by would have been like, what's this guy doing? But I think those are probably the two worst things I've had to animate.
So this is totally, I guess, off topic, but as far as the perils of your front steps, last winter I slipped because it's very cold where I am and icy, and I slipped on my front steps and landed right on my butt. And this is maybe TMI, but like it's permanently like disfigured. Like,
oh no!
It's just like, yeah, it's like a dent.
Did you damage your tailbone or something?
No, like I landed thankfully on a very cushy spot, but like it hurt so bad. I like was literally crawling and like looking around like, is anybody here to help me? And nobody was. And I was just like, thank goodness I hit probably the best spot, but it is actually like not better. Like it is dented permanently.
Wow. I don't know if this is a common superstition or if it's just something in my family, but they seem to think that if you slip and fall someplace, that means you're going to stay there. Like if you move someplace, because like I'm in New York now, but like I grew up in South Florida. So my mom was always like, be careful when you go out in the snow, because if you slip and fall on your butt, that means that you're going to stay there. I'm like, okay. Huh. But so far I haven't slipped and fallen on my butt, but I've stayed here, so I don't know. Anyway.
As far as the rotoscoping still, I kind of thought you might say your horse was...
Well, Yeah, that was a fake horse that I made.
Yes.
Yeah, I gave a talk about my rotoscoping process, and I ended it a couple of years ago, like showing off how I made a fake horse and just had to sort of ride on it. But it was actually very sturdily balanced. It wasn't like that precarious. So,
How difficult or easy was it to work with your cat for rotoscoping?
my cat. Oh, you mean the black cat that I rotoscoped?
Yeah.
That's actually my mom's cat. And,
okay.
He was just walking around. I was down home visiting, and he walked by, and I was like, "Oh, he has a very controlled walk." So I was just on a whim. I was like, "Can you call him?" So she called him, and he came across the room, and I just filmed him, and it was super easy. He was very willing to do it. It wasn't like I had to put him on a treadmill or anything.
Is there a trick to rotoscoping to avoid that like uncanny valley look from the old Lord of the Rings movie, which is like really is an unsettling look?
So Rosewater is 720p, but it's still pixel art. I think the uncanny valley just comes from the fact that it was just like a higher resolution, I guess, in like Lord of the Rings. And it was also very framey. Like I still try and keep my frame count low. Like my walk cycles are only 10 frames, and more complex animations I try and keep under 20 frames or so, just not to get so weird looking. Because then if you get too smooth, then it definitely has that uncanny valley look.
I assume you must not, I mean, I guess you can't for everything. You can't rotoscope everything, like backgrounds or whatnot. But how many fetishes have you discovered by looking up reference images?
Oh my God. I did tweet about this the other day.
You did?
There's a scene where, there's a scene where there's some bandits who have kidnapped the town sheriff, and you go and find him. And I hadn't, I was animating the bandits, but I hadn't done the sheriff. And so I was like, I guess I could like lie on the floor and do this myself. But let's see if I can find something real quick on Google. So I Googled man tied up, and oh my God, I was not prepared for the images that I got. So I quickly decided I would just do it myself, and I haven't yet. But I mean, obviously I don't need to like tie myself up. I just need to lie on the floor, and then I'll add the ropes in post, as it were.
Then you can add that to Google Images, and someone can actually find something that may help them.
Yeah, maybe. You never know. But you have to be careful sometimes what you search for.
Right. This is actually, I got from that Scene World podcast that just came out today. Did your teacher, you commercially started doing games 2013, 2014. You've been making games, obviously, much longer, as you said. And around 1998, I think, you were making games that were basically just making fun of your teachers. Did any of them ever get word of it, or did they play it?
No. Thankfully, no. Although, funnily enough, through just one of those weird things of life, I kept in touch with one of my only teachers that I kept in touch with from high school was from my theory of knowledge class, which was basically like high school philosophy, because I was in a program that had like weird other IB program. People will know what I'm talking about if anyone is listening. But it was called Theory of Knowledge. She was really cool. I really liked her. I kept in touch with her on Facebook, just like on and off over the years. And one day I was like, "Hey, I'm going to be in town. You want to meet up?" Whatever. So we met up, and this was shortly after I had started making games. So I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm making games now." And she's like, "Oh really? I used to love playing adventure games." And I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "Yeah. When I used to get stuck, and I used to ignore my family because I was trying to figure out like how to do the things." I'm like, "Oh my God, if I had known you would liked adventure games when you were my teacher, that would have been amazing." Because I don't know. I don't think it would have made any difference, but I would have been like, wow, somebody else I know likes adventure games. So I've given her Steam keys for my games, but I don't know if she's actually gotten around to playing them.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
How's your search for a new hobby going? You mentioned at your Adventure X panel that you're kind of a workaholic and don't really have anything else going on.
You've done your research. I'm impressed. Yeah, I mean, I'm in a book club, like I said, at Adventure X. We're currently reading Great Expectations, and that's been nice, but I haven't really gotten back into any other hobbies. I started exercising again, at least. That's something, because I stopped like last July because I don't want to get too much into it, but I had some health problems where I was like, I'm going to stop exercising, and then I just never got back into it. So I'm like, well, at least that's a hobby, I guess, if you can call it that. I don't know. Anyway,
I think
so. It's going. I don't know how successful it is, but it's going.
Do you find, is there, like, when you can get into something, whether it be exercising or book club or whatever, when you can actually, like, get out of the work, do you find it helps at all idea-wise, or no effect? Like, when you come back to it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, the thing is, it depends on what stage of the project it is, because right now, for example, there's really, I'm kind of just in the production mode, right? Like, I have the game is done, it's fully playable. It's just adding everything that's missing. Like in this case, right now, I'm just working on the animations of all the NPCs that are still placeholder sprites. So there's really no new ideas, really. It's just kind of like I have a giant list that I have to check off. So like getting away from the work right now, it's like, okay, well, I'm away from the work, but then I'm just like, oh, but I still have all this to do, right? So right now it's not quite like that, but yeah, sometimes like, I remember actually, speaking of that scene with the bandits, I was upstate hiking a few years ago, and just, it was a little getaway. We were, my partner and I, we were upstate hiking, and I was walking along, and I looked up at the trees, and I was like, and I saw a wasp's nest, and I was like, oh, I can put this in this scene and have it be a thing that happens. So I got an idea from being away from work and out in nature. So yeah.
Cool.
Sometimes.
You also mentioned during that same part of that panel that you have you were painting miniatures, you stopped, but they were miniatures of your own characters.
Yeah.
Did you 3D print them, and then, like, do you still have them?
I did, yeah. Yeah, I'm looking at them right now. They're here on my desk. Yeah, it's this website called Hero Forge, and you can, like, design your own little characters. Ideally, the idea is that you do them for, like, tabletop RPG purposes. But I messed around with it, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. So yeah, I had them 3D printed and painted them, and they're my little work mascots. Yeah. If
Conan O'Brien were to do a Clueless Gamer on Rosewater, how do you think he would review it?
Oh my god. First of all, I would be honored. I would yeah, I love Conan.
I know, me too.
Yeah, if Conan did a Rosewater, oh my god, what would he do? How would he? It's been such a long time since I watched it. I would be interested in seeing how Conan struggled to play a point-and-click adventure game. Even though I'm trying to, like, my main thing is to, like, try and streamline the UI to make it easy for someone who didn't grow up playing point-and-click adventure games. So it's just a single-click interface, and, like, when you click on things that have more than one possible interaction, a little radial menu pops up. So I don't know that he would struggle too much with, like, how to play the game, but I think he'd probably, like, just, I don't know, want to punch everybody and be like, why can't I punch you? Or I don't know.
That's pretty good, yeah. Well, kind of along those lines, though, as far as making it an easier interface, like, I know you've talked about how some people have given you guff for not having a manual inventory where it's like, okay, right, grab key, put key in door. But, like, I kind of agree with you. Like, if it's clearly, like, this key goes in this door, like, why do I need to take the extra step here? Let's just get it to work.
Yeah, I mean, with Rosewater, like, obviously Lamplight City didn't have inventory for that reason. Rosewater does have inventory, but I've streamlined it a little bit. It's basically, did you ever play The Longest Journey?
I did not.
Okay, well, The Longest Journey did something similar. Well, The Longest Journey did the exact same thing, which was that when you selected an inventory item, it would only highlight over things that you could use inventory items on and get a response. So it cuts out the whole use everything on everything thing, and specifically the I can't do that thing that you get way too much. So for example, if there's something on screen and it's like, let's say it's a door, right? That needs a key. And yeah, okay, if you have the key, you can use it on the door. But like you can, if you hover the inventory item, any inventory item over it, it'll highlight. But if you hover that same inventory item over any other hotspot on that screen that doesn't require an inventory item to proceed, then it doesn't highlight. So that way like, okay, well, I obviously need an item on this. And then that way also, if you use the wrong inventory item, you can write more custom things like, oh, that won't get the door open, or something to nudge you in the right direction, to as far as to give you the idea of what you should be trying. Because I've been a big proponent of getting rid of that doesn't work.
Is it just you find that's like a cliche at this point, or what?
It's not so much. I mean, it is a cliche, and also just as a designer, I don't like having to sit there and think about all the messages I have to write discouraging the player. It's like you're playing these adventure games to, I would assume, have fun and not be frustrated. So it's like, why would you want to spend the majority of your time being told what you can't do instead of what you can do? And that just seems to be like the accepted thing in adventure games. Like, well, if I can't figure everything out, I'm just going to try clicking everything on everything and have to listen to the player telling me that I can't do that until something does work, So I just think that the whole experience can be better done.
Right. We're getting near the end here, but I did want to bring up, you've, despite the whole, oh my gosh, do people still remember the game? You have said, you like the game. You play it a lot to test it, and you think it's a good game. Can you kind of just tell us what makes it good in your eyes? What is something you're really proud of about it?
I just really like the world that I've created. Like, even the part that I've played the most, honestly, is like the beginning of the game, because I had to test the demo and all of that stuff. And like the part where you're actually in the town of Rosewater proper, like, just even though it's only a few screens, it feels like an old west town, and like you're walking around and you can visit the doctor and the sheriff and you can talk to everybody, and like there's people in the background and there's pedestrians, and it's like, the wind is blowing and the flies are buzzing, and I don't know, it just feels like a really fun place to walk around and look at stuff. And I don't know, I just get this feeling of like, I don't know, it's hard to describe, and it's hard to describe in a way that doesn't make it sound like I'm just tooting my own horn. But I don't know, there's just something about it, and something about the interface, and like, I don't know, it just feels right to me, and I hope it feels right to people who play it. I mean, you were saying before, to go back a little bit, but you were saying before about the pandemic and everything, like, yeah, like, Adventure X 2022 was the first time that I actually showed the game off in person and had people play it, which was terrifying, because I was like, have I wasted the last 2 years of my life or 3 years of my life? But yeah, other people have played it and enjoyed it, and the feedback I've gotten from the demo has been really good too. So yeah, I don't know, I guess I don't want to get too overconfident, but I feel good about the game. So fingers crossed that it'll be enjoyed when it comes out.
Was it received well at Adventure X, and is it sort of now like a mad dash to get feedback, like just sending it out all over?
It was well received at Adventure X. It's not really, I mean, I have an alpha build that I'm still trying to get to make sure that it works before I send it out to testers. But at this point, I feel like, again, not to sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but like, I don't feel like there's anything in the game that will need to be cut. I don't feel like there's any major sticking points right now, because I feel like I've designed enough games that I have a general idea of what will be a sticking point or what will be a puzzle that will stump people. And I have sent out like pieces of the game, like isolated to specific puzzles to people that I know and trust. Like there's a sequence where you have to beat somebody at shooting, and so I wanted to make sure that, like, because you can either shoot or like get one of your companions to help you, or get one of your companions to just flat out do it for you. So I wanted to make sure that the actual like shooting part was balanced so that it wasn't impossibly difficult, but it also wasn't stupidly easy. So I sent that to a few people, and just, little things here and there, but I don't feel like when I send it out, I could be wrong, but I feel like when I send it out for alpha testing, I'm not going to get people saying, oh my God, I couldn't get this bit at all. And then I'll have to be like, well, I guess I have to cut that or completely redesign it or anything like that. So.
Cool. Well, people can keep up to date on this. Your YouTube is at Grundislav Games. That's Grundislav Games. Twitch, you've been doing some dev streams. Grundislav is the Twitch, and you can wishlist it on Steam. Rosewater is the game. Francisco Gonzalez, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.